My name is Ruth Hayes. I'm 34 years old and I'm a pediatric nurse, which means I knew exactly what was wrong with my baby son a full 10 seconds before I let myself believe it. Last night at 11:42, my little sister stood on my front porch, screaming my name through the Ring camera, begging me to stop. 10 months before that, she showed up to a family dinner holding a glass of wine. 5 weeks after she broke the one rule I had and put my 7-month-old in intensive care. When I asked her why she wouldn't stop, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "He's still breathing, isn't he?" But here's what none of them knew standing in that hospital hallway back in September. The poisoning wasn't the worst thing my family would do that year. What my own mother did in a courtroom 3 months later is the part I still can't say out loud without my hands shaking. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where family secrets come to light and quiet women stop being quiet. If stories about boundaries, betrayal, and hard-won peace speak to you, you're in the right place. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up because the ending only makes sense if you know what I was protecting. I live in Maple Glen, Ohio, one of those towns where the hardware store still closes for high school football. I've worked the pediatric floor at St. Anne's for 11 years. I put myself through nursing school on night shifts and instant noodles, and I married Dean Whitaker, a substation operator with calloused hands and the patience of a fence post. He works storm rotations, gone for days when the grid goes down. We have 2 kids. Emma was 6 that fall, all missing teeth and strong opinions. And Noah, our bonus baby, arrived in February after we'd given away every onesie and sworn we were done. 7 months old that September, fat little wrists, a laugh like a squeaky door that made Dean drop whatever he was holding. People tease me about how I run my house. Labels on the spice jars, a laminated card on the fridge with dosing weights for children's Tylenol, a checklist in the diaper bag. At work they call it charting. And charting is the habit that keeps small people alive because if it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Dean says, I document our marriage like the state might audit it. He's not wrong, but people always ask why I'm like this, why I double-check locks and count pills and read labels twice. They assume it's the job. It isn't. The job just gave my caution a uniform and a paycheck. The real answer is older than my nursing license, older than Dean, older than this town. The answer is the house I grew up in, 2 counties east of here, where the rule was that nothing bad ever happened, no matter how often it did. My father was a good man on paper and a drinker everywhere else. He worked the loading dock 30 years, and every night he earned what my mother called his medicine, a tumbler by his chair. Then 2, then the bottle, riding shotgun in his truck like a passenger with seniority. Nobody used the word drunk in our house. Dad was tired. Dad was under the weather. Dad had a long week, and it was always a long week. My mother, Diane, ran the cover story like a second job. She watered his whiskey when she thought he wasn't looking and pressed his shirts for church. And if a neighbor saw him stumble on the porch steps, she'd laugh and blame the loose board. She fixed the board too. That's the part people miss about families like mine. The lying isn't lazy, it's devoted. It's a full-time labor of love, performed by people who would rather sand down reality every single day than say one true sentence out loud. What happens in this house stays in this house. I could embroider that on a pillow. When I was 19, my father's liver finally filed its resignation. The obituary said heart trouble. Everyone at the funeral said heart trouble in the same tone you'd use to agree the weather was mild. I stood next to the casket knowing the truth and saying the weather was mild. In my family, forgiveness was just a faster word for forgetting. I learned that before I learned to drive. And here's the detail that matters for everything that comes next. Chelsea was 17 the year Dad died. Out of the 2 of us, I'm the one who moved away, went to school, built a life. Chelsea is the one who never really left that house, not in any way that counts. I want to be fair to my sister because she's not a monster, and this story doesn't work if you think she is. Chelsea sober is the best company in 3 counties. She does voices when she reads to kids. She remembers your coffee order from one visit. When Emma was little, Chelsea was the fun aunt in the truest sense. Glitter, glue, and puddle jumping, the whole catalog. But Chelsea drinks the way our father drank. And for 10 years, I watched it climb. The bar job she loved, gone after she poured for herself on shift. The DUI 2 years before Noah was born when I paid $2,800 for her look. And told Dean it was a loan, knowing it wasn't. The apartment deposits, the Sunday calls that started sweet and curdled by the second glass. Every time my mother had a translation ready, she's high-spirited. She's grieving her father. She just needs family to believe in her. The last straw had a date on it. Emma's FTH birthday, about a year and a half before Noah came along. Chelsea arrived 2 hours late, glassy and loud, tripped over a folding chair and took the cake table down with her. Frosting on the fence, Emma crying into my shoulder, asking why Aunt Chelsea was walking funny. That night I drove to Chelsea's apartment, sat across from her at the kitchen counter and gave her the only boundary I had left. You don't drink around my kids ever, that's it. One rule. I didn't ask her to quit. I didn't ask her to apologize. One rule and she could stay in our lives. She agreed before I even finished talking. I've been a nurse long enough to know what that meant. Addicts agree fastest to the rules they don't plan to keep. For a while the rule held and then something better than the rule showed up. Hope. The spring after Noah came, Chelsea got sober, really sober, not brochure sober. She found a Tuesday night group in a church basement 2 towns over and actually went. Her skin cleared, her texts came at normal hours and made sense. She showed up to meet Noah at the hospital with grocery store flowers and shaking hands, and she held him like he was made of church glass. She apologized to Emma the right way. No speech, just a Saturday of baking cinnamon rolls together and letting Emma crack every egg. I stood in my own kitchen watching them laugh with flour on their faces, and I wanted to believe so badly. It felt like a fever. My mother was radiant. She kept saying all that girl ever needed was for her family to believe in her. 5 months, that's what Chelsea had that September. 5 months, and the whole family counted them out loud like a rosary. I counted too. I just also kept counting other things quietly, the way I count respirations on a sleeping patient without waking anyone up. Where her eyes went at the barbecue when Dean opened a beer cooler. How she left early on the bad anniversary. I hated myself a little for it. The sister with the clipboard auditing a miracle. But you don't spend 11 years on a pediatric floor without learning that hope is a vital sign. You chart it and then you keep watching the monitor. Then September came and Noah's daycare called at 6 in the morning. Chickenpox, snorts of all things, 2 confirmed cases, the whole infant room shut down for 2 weeks. And life, which has a sense of humor, picked exactly those 2 weeks to test me. Understand the box I was in because I've replayed it every night for a year. Our pediatric ICU was down 3 nurses that month, 1 on maternity leave, 1 out with a back injury, 1 poached by a travel agency for double pay. I had a 2-year-old patient on the unit recovering from RSV whose mother slept in a chair beside him, and a charge nurse begging people not to call off. Dean was on storm rotation mandatory, a hurricane's leftovers chewing through the grid. Gone 4 days at a stretch. There was no neighbor with infant experience, no drop-in daycare that takes a 7-month-old on 2 days' notice. I said no to Chelsea watching Noah before anyone even suggested it out loud. I said it twice, once to Dean on the phone and once at my mother's kitchen table with Chelsea sitting right there. I watched it land on her like a slap. She decided to take gracefully. Then my mother made her offer and it was a good offer. That's the thing. I will be there every single minute. She said Chelsea just helps with bottles and laundry. You're not leaving him with her, you're leaving him with me. 61 years old, raised 2 kids, never missed a Sunday. My whole life, whatever else she got wrong, my mother showed up. So I agreed with conditions. And I said the conditions out loud in front of everyone like I was reading orders back to a doctor. Mom never leaves the house. Chelsea is never alone with him. Any drink, any bottle, anything off, you call me and I will walk off my shift. Everyone nodded. My mother squeezed my hand. Chelsea said softly, "Thank you for trusting me, Ruthie. My conditions held for exactly 4 days. Day 5 was a Thursday and Noah was cutting his first tooth, which means nobody in my house had slept. He'd been up most of the night, red-cheeked and furious at his own gums, and I'd been up with him, walking the hallway in figure eights. Before I left for my shift, I did what I do. I laid it all out on the counter like a med cart. The infant Tylenol with the dose circled for his weight, the teething ring in the freezer, the spare in the fridge, a note printed because my handwriting is a nurse's handwriting. No honey, no blankets in the crib. Call me first, then the pediatrician's line taped underneath. My mother patted my cheek and told me she'd rise. Ed 2 babies through teeth. Thank you very much. Chelsea looked tired but clear and she took the note seriously or performed taking it seriously, and the truth is I no longer know which. My shift was the kind where you don't sit down. Around 1:00 I got a text from my mother, running to the pharmacy for my blood pressure refill. 20 minutes. Chelsea's rocking him, all is well. I stood in the med with my thumb over the screen and felt the old alarm ring in a place I'd trained myself to ignore, and I answered it like a professional. I called her. No answer. She was driving. I texted, "Go back, please." The deal was every minute. I watched the little dots appear and disappear. A patient's IV pump started screaming down the hall. 20 minutes became 40 the way they do. At 1:53 my mother's next text came through and it wasn't an answer. "Ruth, come home now." I don't remember the drive except that I made it in 18 minutes instead of 25, and I was already talking to dispatch in my head. I came through my own front door like a rescue crew. My mother stood in the living room with both hands over her mouth. Chelsea hovered by the crib we kept downstairs, swaying a little, saying his name in a high sing-gong voice. Noah, buddy, and my son was lying there wrong. Every parent knows their babies sleep. I know 500 babies sleep. Noah was gray, pale, limp as a dish towel, skin cool and damp. When I got my hand on his chest, breath shallow and too slow. And when I peeled an eyelid back, his eyes were rolling like a doll's. I leaned close and the smell hit me. Sweet and sharp underneath the milk, unmistakable to a girl raised where I was raised. I've told this next part to police, doctors, lawyers, and a judge, and it never gets easier. The bottle was still on the side table, an inch of formula left. I lifted it to my nose, whiskey in the bottle. Chelsea's voice ran down my spine like ice water. He wouldn't stop crying. She said, "It's a drop on the gums. Grandma did it for us, everybody did it." He just finally relaxed. There was a glass on the counter too, hers mostly empty, and it was not the first one. I know how to read a room I grew up in. I didn't scream, I became someone else. The person work built. And that person called 911. Gave weight and age and symptoms, started counting respirations against my watch. And while my mouth did the professional things, one sentence beat inside my skull over and over in time with my son's slow breathing. One rule, one rule, one rule. They tell you not to run in a hospital, and everyone at St. Is broke that rule for my son. The ER team took him from my arms and became a machine with 12 hands. I've been part of that machine 1,000 times. Snort standing outside it is a different country. His blood sugar came back low enough to set off alarms, which is what alcohol does to babies. It doesn't just sedate them. It starves the brain of fuel and lets the body's temperature fall through the floor. They got a line in his scalp because the veins in his little arms had clamped down. Dextrose, warm blankets in layers. The lab confirmed what my nose already knew. Ethanol positive in a 7-month-old. Dr. Acapper ran the room, a tall, gay-haired woman I'd worked beside for years, and she never raised her voice once, which somehow made everything she said land harder. Near dawn, she found me in the family alcove of my own unit, sitting in the vinyl chair I'd guided 100 mothers into. He's stable, she said. Kids his size don't have any margin, Ruth. With his weight, a few hours longer or a little more in that bottle, and we're having a very different conversation. I nodded like a colleague. I heard it like a mother. Noah spent the night in the pediatric ICU, 3 doors down from the patient I'd been charting on that afternoon, and I sat beside his warmer with my hand through the porthole, holding one fat wrist, feeling the pulse tick against my fingers. Before Dr. Acapher left, she paused at the door and said the sentence I have said gently to hundreds of other parents. You understand we're required to report this? I said yes, I understood. I had no idea. Here is what nobody tells you about mandatory reporting. The report doesn't go out with a villain's name on it. It goes out with an address, and the address was mine. Within 2 days, a caseworker from Children's Services was sitting on my couch with a clipboard because that's the procedure. The child's guardians get assessed first, and I would defend that procedure with my last breath, even though living inside it felt like being skinned. She walked my house. She opened my medicine cabinet and photographed the lock on it. She interviewed Dean by phone, patched in from a utility yard 200 m away, his voice shaking with the effort of staying polite. She asked Emma gently with me outside the door whether the grown-ups in her house ever acted funny. My daughter said, Aunt Chelsea walks funny sometimes. 6 years old. Then came Detective Marsh, a rumpled, decent man who took my statement at the kitchen table, and I gave him what I had because of course I had it. The printed note with the Tylenol dose, the texts, the timeline I'd started writing in the ambulance out of pure muscle memory, times and observations in block letters. He read my documentation twice and looked at me differently after the way people look at you when your habits stop being funny and start being evidence. Then he closed his notebook and said, Your sister gave a statement this morning. She tells a version of that afternoon that's a little different from yours. Want to hear it? If you've ever sat in a hospital chair because somebody you love called danger a family tradition, I need you to hear this part. You are not crazy and you are not alone. Tell me in the comments the one rule you will never bend again, because I've learned there's always one. And if you're new here, take 1 second and subscribe, because what my family did next after the hospital, after the police, is the reason this story exists at all. Chelsea's version was a masterpiece, and I mean that with the specific bitterness of someone who has watched the artist train her whole life. 1 drop, she told the detective. 1 drop rubbed on his gums for the pain, an old family remedy, her grandmother's trick, completely harmless. And honestly, she was surprised nobody appreciated that she'd stayed calm in a crisis. The lab numbers said otherwise. You don't get a positive blood alcohol in an 18 lb baby from a drop on the gums. You get it from whiskey stirred into a bottle by a hand that had also poured at least 2 glasses for itself, which is what she'd done, standing in my kitchen on day 5 of a job she begged for. Marsh laid it out flat, no drama, the way tired men tell the truth. And my mother, standing in the hospital hallway in her church cardigan, listened to all of it and found her line. She didn't mean anything by it, Ruth. There was no malice in that girl. Malice, as if intent were the only ingredient that mattered, as if the bottle cared what the hand was feeling when it poured. I stood there holding my discharge paperwork and heard the family catechism assemble itself in real time. No malice means no crime. No crime means no harm. No harm means nothing happened. And nothing happening is what this family does best. I was too tired to fight it that day. I took my son home and slept on his floor with 2 baby monitors. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived from the county prosecutor's office addressed to me and Dean, and I read it standing at the mailbox. The state of Ohio, it turned out, had gone ahead and made a decision my family was still pretending nobody had to make. People say press charges like it's a button victims push. And I need you to know it doesn't work that way, because my family still doesn't. The county prosecutor charged Chelsea with endangering children. Not me, not Dean. The state did that on the strength of the medical report and the police file, the way the state is supposed to when a baby turns up with alcohol in his blood. Her bond conditions came printed in plain English. No contact with Noah, no presence at our address, no alcohol. A woman named Paula Reyes called from the victim advocate's office, warm and unhurried, and explained my actual role, which was smaller and heavier than my family imagined. The state decides the charges, she said. You decide what you tell the court about what this did to your family. That's yours and nobody can take it or force it. I wrote that down. It was the first thing in months that felt like solid ground. My relatives, meanwhile, got their legal education from a group chat. By Friday, the story had hardened. Ruth had her own sister arrested. Ruth is pressing charges over an accident. Ruth called the police on family as if the ER hadn't been legally required to do it, as if I'd had a vote. My cousin sent a broken heart emoji. My Aunt Carol sent a paragraph about how family doesn't take family to court, punctuation optional. I could have corrected them. I sat down twice to type it out. The statutes, the mandatory reporting law, the simple fact that none of this was my decision. And then my mother called me, and by the time she was done talking, I understood that the facts were never going to be the fight. My mother didn't yell. Yelling was never her instrument. She cried first, real tears, I want to be fair. And then she got down to business with the calm of a woman renegotiating a warranty. This will destroy her. Ruth, a record follows a person forever. You know that. All you have to do is tell that prosecutor you've forgiven her. Tell them you don't want this and they'll drop it down to nothing. She's your sister. She's sick. You of all people should understand sick. I told her the truth, that it wasn't mine to drop, and she moved past it the way water moves past a rock. Aunt Carol called next, then a cousin I hadn't heard from since her wedding. Each reciting the same lesson from the same invisible hymnal. We handle things as a family, meaning quietly, meaning never. Dean was home by then, and he stood in our kitchen reading the bond conditions with his jaw set and said, "They're asking you to protect the thing that hurt him." He wanted to answer the phone calls himself. I asked him not to, and here's my confession, the part I'd write differently now. I still believed I could carry both, keep my son safe and keep my family whole, be the good sister and the good mother in the same body, the way I'd been doing since I was 9 years old. So when my mother called back with an olive branch Sunday dinner, just family, no lawyers, we fixed this at a table like people who love each other, I said yes. I left the kids home with Dean. Looking back, that was the only decision I got right that whole day. My mother's dining room hasn't changed since 1998. Same oak table, same china cabinet, same needly oint blessing on the wall. She cooked like it was Easter, roast chicken, the good tablecloth, candles, a stage set for the play called We're Fine. Aunt Carol was there and 2 cousins, buffer people, chosen for their talent of talking about nothing. Chelsea's chair sat empty through the salad. Then she came out of the kitchen and the room went quiet in a way I have only otherwise heard in hospitals. My sister, 5 weeks after my son's ICU night, out on bond with a no-alcohol condition, walked to the table carrying a glass of red wine, full, held high and a little forward the way you carry a candle in a procession. And here is the detail I will take to my grave. Nobody said a word, not my mother, who had begged me to believe in her girl, not Carol, mid-sentence about her porch renovation. Forks moved. Someone complimented the chicken. The glass sat by her plate like a loaded thing, and the whole family ate around it, and I watched the machinery of my childhood run at full power, smooth, warm, and airtight. I want you to know I tried to do it their way for one more minute. I ate a bite. Then I set my fork down and asked her quietly, no audience voice, the only question I actually had. After everything, Chelsea, why won't you stop? My sister looked at me over the rim of that glass, took a slow sip, and smiled the way she does when she's already won a game nobody else agreed to play. He's still breathing, isn't he? Nobody gasped. My mother reached for the potatoes. I stood up, folded my napkin, and I heard my own voice come out level one last time from the doorway. One rule, and I walked out of my mother's warm, candle-lit house into the cold. I sat in my car in her driveway until my hand stopped shaking, which took about 10 minutes. And I remember what came after the shaking with perfect clarity, because it wasn't rage, it was quiet. That glass of wine did something a year of arguing never could have done. It ended the debate. As long as the question was whether Chelsea meant harm, my family could argue intent forever. They're artists of intent. But the glass wasn't about my son at all. The glass was an answer to a different question, the only one that matters with an addiction. Given everything, what will you choose? And she'd chosen in front of witnesses with the candles lit. That night at my kitchen table, I wrote the first draft of my victim impact statement in block letters, the same handwriting as my timelines. I called Paul Reese on Monday and told her I'd be at every hearing, that I would tell the court exactly what happened and exactly what it cost, and that I would not be requesting leniency or severity, just the truth and the protections. Then I did the small things that don't make good television. I had the locks changed. I gave Emma's school an updated pickup list with photographs. Me, Dean, one neighbor, nobody else. I printed the bond conditions and put a copy in the diaper bag next to the dosing card, because paper is how I pray. Notice what I didn't do, because it matters later. I didn't post anything. I didn't call one relative to argue my case. Chelsea's weapon has always been the performance, and I refused to get on stage. 4 days later, my sister changed phases too. She came to find me at the one place I had left that still felt safe. I was 6 hours into a shift when the front desk paged me, and I came around the corner into the pediatric lobby to find my sister at the check-in window asking for me by name. Wednesday afternoon, she was crying, the loud kind, and under the fluorescent lights I could see the sheen on her and smell it from 6 ft away over the hand sanitizer. There were parents in that lobby. There were my patient's parents in that lobby.